Okay, so in this video I'm going to go over the basics of using the editor that's built into Doom 3. So first of all, in the grid window, right click and drag to pan your view around. The numbers at the top and to the left are grid coordinates, which help to indicate size, distance, and position. There are several options for zooming in and out of the grid window. You can use the mouse wheel, which is probably the most convenient. You can also use the insert or delete keys, or the open and close bracket keys. And if you hold down the Alt key and right click and drag, you can zoom in and out very quickly. Next, in the Z window, right click and drag to pan the view up and down. Hold Control, left click, or middle mouse click to reposition the camera height. Hold Control and right click above or below the lower marker to reposition it. Hold Shift and right click above or below the upper marker to reposition it. Hold Control and right click above the upper marker to reposition both markers higher up the Z-axis. Hold Shift and right click below the lower marker to reposition both markers lower down the Z-axis. Okay, so I've added some geometry to demonstrate the exclude functionality of the Z window. Everything that is outside of in between the upper and lower markers will be excluded. So what I want to do is position the upper marker lower down to exclude, let's say, the orange, purple, and green objects. So I'm going to move that about down to here, and then hold Control, Shift, and right click to toggle the exclude functionality on. So because those are outside of from in between the upper and lower markers, they disappear. This is useful if your map has a lot of objects that are cluttering your ability to work with some point of interest. So hold Control and Shift and right click again to toggle that off. I'm going to position the upper marker a little lower down to exclude the roof and toggle it back on, and now I can see inside of the box. So again, it's pretty useful if you have a very large map with many objects that you need to get out of your way. There are three perspectives of the grid window. I'm currently in the side view. I can change to the other perspectives by pressing Control Tab to cycle through the top, front, and side view. I can also press the Change Views button here. Changing views will set the focus on the camera and move it to the center of the grid window. This can be accomplished by pressing the Home key also. The name of the currently selected view and its two respective grid lines are displayed at the top left, currently looking at the X axis and the Z axis when I'm in the front view. Cycling to the side view, I'm looking at the Z axis and the Y axis, and when I'm in top view, I'm looking at the X and Y axis. When I'm in top view, the Z icon is displayed. If you hold Shift and middle mouse click, you can reposition the Z icon. You can press the A or Z keys to move the camera angle up or down at intervals of 22.5 degrees. You can press the D or C keys to move the camera up or down by intervals of 32 units. Press the up or down arrow keys to move the camera forward or backwards by units of 32. Press the left or right arrow keys to turn the camera at 22.5 degree angles. Press the End key to align the camera facing forward along the XY plane. The End key also snaps the camera to the closest Z-axis rotation interval of 22.5 degrees. In the camera window, right click and drag to move forward or backward and turn left or right. Hold Control then right click to pan your view in the camera window. Okay, moving on, let's talk about grid unit size. By default, each square is set to a grid unit size of 8 by 8, and the darker, greater grid lines is 64 by 64. Pressing the number keys 1 through 7 will set the grid size from 1 to 64. Very small grid sizes you'll have to zoom in to be able to see. If you hold Shift and press 2, 3, and 4, you can decrease the grid size even further, which you'll probably have to zoom in to see. Your current grid size is displayed at the bottom under the G parameter, and again 8 is the default. You can toggle the grid on and off by pressing the 0 number key. Click on Grid to see all of your options. Okay, moving further, let's talk about navigating the camera. In the grid window, the blue rhombus diamond is the camera position. Attached to it is a 90-degree right angle, which represents the peripheral perspective of what the camera sees in front of it, which is displayed in the camera window. If you have a middle mouse button or a scroll wheel that functions as a middle mouse button, click once in the grid window, or click and drag to set the perspective of the camera very precisely. This is useful when working with a very small grid size. Hold Control and middle mouse click to teleport the camera to a new position. You can also click and drag. Again, this is very useful for working with small grid sizes or teleporting across vast distances of a large map. Any of these windows, except the floating expector window, can be expanded by double-clicking on the tabs. Okay, now I'm going to talk about the basics of creating a brush. A brush is used to create simple or complicated geometry in your map. Creating a brush is pretty simple. Just left click and drag in the grid viewport. Left click and drag inside of the brush to reposition it. Left click and drag outside of the brush to resize it. You can do this in any of the windows. Pressing the Q key displays the dimensions of the brush and its origin at the top left. Press the space bar to duplicate a brush that you have selected. Hold Shift and left click to select multiple brushes. Hold Shift and left click again to deselect a brush from your selection. Press the backspace key to delete a brush. Press the escape key to deselect brushes. With the brush selected, press the plus or minus keys on the number pad to raise or lower a brush according to the grid unit size you have selected. If you hold Control and press the number keys 3 through 9, you'll create a 3 or 9-sided polygon. If you continue to press the same number key, its size will increase. Press Ctrl Z to undo all of these operations. You can rotate a selected brush by clicking on the Rotate X, Y, and Z axis buttons. You can also go to Selection and under Rotate, type in an arbitrary rotation value. You can also do a mirror flip operation by pressing the X, Y, Z flip axis buttons. Now let's cover the slice operation. In the front view of the grid window, I'm just going to click and drag and create a simple brush, and then hold Control and right click to set a first coordinate for a slice operation. Hover over the marker and a crosshair appears, left click and drag to reposition the marker. Hold Control and right click again to set a second coordinate. Again, you can reposition this if necessary. A yellow selection is displayed, which represents the location of the slice and the side of the brush that will be saved after the slice operation. Press Control and Enter to flip which side of the brush will be saved. Pressing the Enter key confirms the operation and deletes the red portion of the brush. I'm going to press Ctrl Z to back up. I'm going to redo this. If I hold Shift and press Enter, it'll do the slice operation without deleting either side. Positioning the coordinate markers using a clockwise arrangement designates the interior of the circumference as the yellow selection. Unless you press Ctrl Enter to flip it, in which case it's vice versa. Now let's talk about the properties and options found within the Entity tab. So click and drag to create some world spawn brush, and with that selected, you can press the N key to quickly access the Entity tab, or you can just click on it here. I'll just expand this out so we can see it better. Now starting at the very top is a drop down list which displays world spawn entity class that I have selected. If I click on it, it'll display the list of other classes that I can select. So I'll just pick on a plasma gun and then click create. So you can see the entity is now set to weapon plasma gun and is no longer a world spawn entity class. The two panels below this entity drop down list displays properties that pertain to the object that I have selected. The gray portion in both windows displays the key name, and to the right of that is a description of the appropriate property values that can be assigned to the key. Double clicking on one of these will assign the key value to the key field. Then you can just enter in a value. I'll put in 1, which tells me that the weapon cannot be picked up until it's triggered. So it'll just sit there and very annoyingly not be attainable. To the bottom left is a series of buttons that affect the orientation of the object you have selected. So clicking this will assign a key value pair to the bottom window. And if I turn off the rendering, you should see that the object is indeed being affected. Its rotation is being assigned. To the right is a series of other buttons that lets you access particles, models, and sounds. A lot of this is outside the scope of what I really want to cover here, so I'll get into that later. This entity is not a world spawn, so if I try to click this drop down list and turn this into a pistol, it's not going to work. When I hit create, it's going to say failed to create entity, because it needs to be a world spawn, which is pretty quick to do. Just drag out some world spawn, pick your object, and click create, and you can do that very quickly. On a pistol, create it. There you go. Even world spawn itself has its properties. For instance, gravity, no stamina, so if set to 1, you can always run without getting tired. That's reminiscent of the first Doom. No weapons. So different options become available depending on what you have selected. So if I select a light, you can see there's a lot of properties that pertain to a light out of the toolbox of appropriate properties.